I talked to my father and a lot of members of the Lithuanian community in Chicago. Like, have you ever heard of this crazy rumor of Jonas Noreika being accused of killing Jews? And to my shock and surprise, they said, "Yeah, we heard it." And I'm like, "What do you mean you heard it?" And they said, "Yeah, we heard it." And I'm like, "How come nobody ever told me about this?" And they're like, "Well, it's not true. It's just communist propaganda."
Could you start by telling me what you knew of your grandfather before you started looking into him? I don't know, maybe when you were growing up, did you know him? What was your view of him in the early days?
I only knew that he was a hero who fought so bravely against the communists during World War II in Lithuania. I only knew that he died in a KGB prison at the age of 36 because he had tried to lead a big rebellion against the communists. And he tried to round up all the partisans to fight against the Soviet Union in 1946, and he died a martyr as a freedom fighter for the Lithuanian cause. I only knew that he was in a Nazi concentration camp for nearly 2 years. And I also knew that in 1941, he led a rebellion against the Soviets in 1941, and they had won.
So you will have grown up thinking he was some kind of fantastic man who had achieved great things and fought against evils. When did that start to get unpicked?
So it started in the year 2000, after the year my mom was dying on her deathbed and asked me to write a book about her father, my grandfather, who I had never met. Again, I only knew he was this wonderful hero from World War II. And she died in February 2000. And in October 2000, we were burying her and my grandmother at the same time in Lithuania. His wife and his daughter. And after their burial, we went the next day to the school named after him, the Jonas Noreika Grammar School in Šukioniai, Lithuania. And it was at that grammar school that I asked the principal of the school, "Why did you name the school after my grandfather?" And he said that at the time, they had a Russian name because it was occupied with the Soviet Union, and they were very eager to give it a Lithuanian name shortly after Lithuania's independence in 1990. And he was telling me how my grandfather was born in this tiny town and he was such a magnificent hero, and that they wanted to name the school after him. And I thought that would be the end of the story. And then he said, "But we had a lot of trouble after naming the school after your grandfather. We got a lot of complaints." And I said, "Complaints from who?" And he said, "From the Jews." And I said, "What could the Jews possibly say against, my wonderful, magnificent, legendary grandfather, whom I love so much?" And he said that, well, the Jews are accusing him of killing the Jews during the Holocaust in Lithuania. And that at that time in the year 2000, I was 38 years old. And that was the very, very, very first time I had heard anything like this. And I almost fainted right on the spot. And I just couldn't believe it. And you could tell I was visibly upset and, having a very difficult time with this. I was like sitting down by this point, and he's like kind of rubbing my arm, and he says, "But that's all in the past. It doesn't really mean anything. It's just communist propaganda. So don't worry about it." And at that point, I went back to Chicago, my hometown, and I talked to my father and a lot of members of the Lithuanian community in Chicago. Like, have you ever heard of this crazy rumor of Jonas Noreika being accused of killing Jews? And to my shock and surprise, they said, "Yeah, we heard it." And I'm like, "What do you mean you heard it?" And they said, "Yeah, we heard it." And I'm like, "How come nobody ever told me about this?" And they're like, Well, it's not true. It's just communist propaganda.
And so when did you actually start to do your own research and find, well, it really wasn't communist propaganda. He did get up to some pretty dreadful things.
Because everybody in Chicago was, I'm Lithuanian, and I grew up very Lithuanian in Chicago, very much up as part of the community. And because they all said it was communist propaganda, I embraced that and took the easy way out. And it took me almost 10 years. I was a journalist though, but as his granddaughter, I had a very difficult time embracing, coming forth with this idea. So I went into denial. As his granddaughter, I went into denial over this for 10 years. And during that time, I really just researched his heroic side, what he did against the Soviet Union, what he did against the communists. But during all this time, the journalist in me kept telling me, the granddaughter, okay, you're going to have to face this. You're going to have to look into this. There's no way you're going to, not be able to look into this. So after about 10 years, I was kind of ready to think about looking into it. And I thought the way I tricked myself into looking into this, I said, I'm going to exonerate him. I'm going to finally look into the Nazi occupation of Lithuania. And I don't know, I'm sure your listeners are, don't know much about Lithuania, but Lithuania, in 1940 was occupied by the Soviet Union, 1941 occupied by the Nazis for 3 years, and then again 1944 occupied by the Soviet Union until 1990. So most of Lithuanians think this way. Well, we were occupied by the communists for almost 50 years and only by the Nazis for 3. So very few Lithuanians think of the Nazi occupation as a big of a deal as the Soviet occupation. The Soviet occupation occupies like 99% of our brain, and the Nazi occupation doesn't occupy that much of it. But when I started really, really looking into this, I began to kind of shift the furniture in my brain around, if I can express it that way. And I had to kind of move the Soviet occupation over to one side and make the Nazi occupation take over more of my brain. And at that point, I was really, really focusing on what was happening during those 3 years in Lithuania. And that's a very unusual thing for Lithuanians to do.
And what did you actually find out that your grandfather had been involved in? I mean, the accusation was that he was involved in the killing of Jews, but in that 3 years of Nazi occupation, what did that actually mean? What did he do?
Well, it was a big, big deal. He was the governor of Šiauliai region during those 3 years, which is the highest level a Lithuanian can have right under a Nazi. And during that time, he wrote several orders concerning Jews under his domain in that Šiauliai region, which was the second largest region in Lithuania during that time. And the thing that really convinced me was on August 22nd, 1941, he signed an order demanding that all Jews and half Jews in this Šiauliai region, which would number well over 2,000, from every age, babies to grandparents, to be sent to a ghetto in Žagarė, which is a tiny town in Lithuania on the border of Lithuania and Latvia, and that they all should be sent there within 1 week. And so they all had to march over there with each family could have only 200 Reichsmarks at that time. And within 6 weeks, they were all murdered.
Gosh. And what is it about this story that has made you want to not just for yourself reappraise your grandfather and, I don't know, maybe stop thinking about him, but actually go one step further and campaign for the removal of monuments to him in Lithuania. Why do that actively rather than just think, okay, well, I'm not gonna talk about my grandfather much, clearly.
That's an excellent question. It's just, as his granddaughter, I wanted to avoid this whole thing and really burn everything I'm discovering about him that has any connection to the killing Jews. But I think because of my training as a journalist, and if I may say so, because of my faith as a Catholic, and trying to do the right thing, I felt like I just could not ignore this. And even as his own granddaughter, there's so much evidence was piling up in front of me that I realized that this is much bigger than just me and my grandfather, that this is a systemic Lithuanian governmental problem. And I thought other people before me have tried to talk about this issue, but because I think I'm the granddaughter talking, about a famous grandfather in this situation, that something is finally gaining traction. And
Yeah.
I thought if I'm in this position, I should really try to speak out. And so,
And have you had much success? Because there's a statue, correct me if I'm wrong, in Vilnius, which has been, quote, removed for cleaning ahead of the NATO summit that happened. Is that ever going to return?
yeah, that's an excellent question. I feel like I've had with other people some success. It's more success than has been in the past. I don't know what this will mean as far as the final situation goes. But yes, they took down that plaque in Vilnius because they were cleaning the building for the NATO summit. It still hasn't come up. That his plaque has still not been brought up, although it has been promised to brought up, although they are still cleaning the building. So we have to find out when they're done cleaning the building, what is going to happen with that plaque.
And it is your aim just to remove every mention of him, and all plaques, any names of buildings or what have you, all of it gone. That's the aim.
Well, my aim is that, and actually at this point much more, because he's not the only one. My grandfather was not even the worst perpetrator. It's just that he was my grandfather, and that's why I was so interested in him as his granddaughter. I have not written about any of the other perpetrators, who are even worse than him. There is at least a dozen like him who are honored as heroes, but because they fought so bravely against the communists, the Lithuanian government ignores what they did as far as killing Jews. That part somehow doesn't seem to matter. And at this point, since I've gotten this far, it shouldn't just be about my grandfather. It should be about every single Lithuanian who is honored as a hero, should not be considered a hero if they played any role in killing Jews.